Hello, everyone. We're going to be going over kind of wrapping up our Constitution talk. So we're going to be talking about the Constitution itself, quick review, ratification of the Constitution, which means, the states approving it, with voting, and the Federalist, anti-Federalist debate about the ratification of the Constitution. So here we go. The Constitution itself, just a reminder, you have this group of people, 55 delegates, getting together to, there was supposed to be about 70 or 80 delegates, but 55 show up to discuss how to make the articles better. They end up scrapping them, right? We remember this from our Constitution work. And the event itself was not really what you would expect. It was completely private, closed to the public. There was no press allowed. People didn't really talk about what was going on until after the Constitution was actually written and signed and sent out to the states. So they completely scrapped Articles of Confederation to replace it with this new Constitution, and they will need 9 states to ratify the Constitution that they come up with during this convention. So several plans were put forward during the convention with what does the Constitution look like? So you have the Virginia plan, and then you have the New Jersey plan. The Virginia plan was put forward first, and as Virginia is a large state, you could assume that this benefits states like Virginia, especially as far as congressional representation goes. And what we mean by that is your population, how to count the population, and determine how many representatives you will have in Congress. New Jersey and other small states don't really like the Virginia plan, the way that they're counting, because it's going to give them disproportionate representation. And so they put forward their plan, which is supposed to, give more equal footing regardless of your population. And then we have what is known as the Great Compromise. They kind of mashed the two plans together. And remember that unicameral legislature that we had under the Articles of Confederation. Now we have a bicameral legislature, which small states and large states can get on board with. So the small states like the fact that in the Senate, every state has 2 senators, right? So it kind of levels the playing field. The House of Representatives, that's the one where you're based on population. And so your larger states that have more people to represent feel satisfied in the fact that they have more representatives in Congress. All right, so the structure, we're going to pause here real quick, and we're going to do a quick review with the work that you did on the Constitution tour. I want you to take 3 to 5 minutes, whenever Ms. Bauer starts the video back. But I want you to kind of go through some of these questions and elements of the Constitution and make sure that you remember and understand them, okay, to kind of really understand the structure of the Constitution. So you can pause here, find these things, quick review, use these as a guide. And now that the video is resumed, we shall move on, because you've already done all that work with the Constitution. To go over slavery in the Constitution, we have what's called a sectional debate. Okay, this also goes with that thing that we talked about with the Northwest Territory and the Land Ordinance, 1785 and 87, that sectional identity that's starting to form of, slave states versus free states. This is another sectional debate that really occurs between northern and southern states, just because of the amount of slaves that they have in their respective areas. So the Southerners they don't have as large of a white voting or landowning or business men population, and so they want to count slaves towards their representation in Congress. Of course, the Northerners don't agree with this. Uh, so they come up with a compromise. 5 slaves equals the votes of having, 3 white people, 3 white males. So that's how they determine, that's how they factor in the slave population into the overall representation in Congress. Other notable things that come out of the Constitutional Convention, we have this $10 tax on slaves that are imported. So again, trying to move away from the slave trade. And then eventually in 1807, you will have no slave trade at all. So you can still have slavery, but you can't buy new slaves as a part of that Atlantic slave trade. Now we get into ratification. And so the debate over ratification really comes down to 2 groups. Okay, because remember, we sent it to the states for approval. So we need 9 yes votes from the states. Our first group is our Federalists. And as just a quick note on political parties, yes, there is a Federalist Party. And yes, the Federalists here will largely be a part of the Federalist political party that forms. Okay. Anti-Federalists, not a political party. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Whenever we talk political parties, yes, the Federalists are a part of it, but the Anti-Federalists are not. Okay. This is strictly within the lens of defending the Constitution. The Federalists like the Constitution because the Federalist, their name kind of gives it away, federal. They want a stronger national or federal government. They say that the Constitution has checks and balances. It's wonderful between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. It works. They also, what you have here is the Federalist Papers that are sent out and published defending the Constitution and trying to convince states to ratify it. So that's those 85 essays that are written by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay in defense. Now, the Anti-Federalists don't really like the Constitution. They believe that federal government has too much power, no Bill of Rights, and they also do write in response to the Anti-Federalist Papers. Whenever we think about Federalist Papers, there are 2 that really stick out above the rest, and that is Federalist number 10 and Federalist number 51. Federalist number 10 is about factions, and so you have this idea of factions or like interest groups, and this Federalist number 10 attempted to quell or subdue that fear that the government would be too big and too unresponsive to the people, especially as the United States started to grow, right? It's like, how can you have one government, one strong federal government that represents everyone in the United States? It's an impossible task, right? And a quote to kind of illustrate what the point that was trying to get across is the influence of factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through other states. That conflagration is just like a big fire. And so, yes, like individual states may have their own interests that don't apply to other states around them, but other states have their things too. And because so the bigger you grow the union, the more individual interests you have. And so you have to kind of cater to the whole. You can't just cater to one. So the argument here is actually bigger is better because it doesn't allow for one particular group to rise up and dominate the rest. 51 is about checks and balances. And I just love 51 because it has some great kind of like one-liners. So it may be a reflection on human nature that such devices, checks and balances, being those devices, should be necessary to control the abuses of government. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. So I love this. It's like, hey, the checks and balances provided by the different branches of government that we're creating, we wouldn't need them if men were perfect, but men aren't perfect, so we need them. So it's a pretty cool little argument put forward. Here's just a list of the number of states that, in the order that they ratify the Constitution. So Delaware coming in first, Rhode Island is the last to ratify, but it's whenever New Hampshire ratifies in 1788 that's whenever you get those 9 votes. And then we have this little map over here that shows kind of where your Federalist, Anti-Federalist, and evenly divided areas are. Lastly, we have our Bill of Rights, which was added after the Constitution was ratified. Remember, our Anti-Federalists, they were like, wait a second, this Constitution is too vague. It doesn't protect our rights. So take a few minutes here and go find the first 10 amendments of the US Constitution, because we didn't do that in our Constitution tour, just to remind yourself of what they are. And take a second to also answer this question: what is the connection to the American Revolution and the time period just before it to the Bill of Rights? Okay, so now that we've reminded ourselves what the Bill of Rights are, they're the ones that we're most familiar with whenever it comes to the Constitution more often. But these were added to satisfy the, especially states that feared the big government. They're like, wait a second, the Constitution doesn't say exactly what the government can and cannot do. And so it's funny because right after, if we look back at our ratification, Rhode Island finishes ratifying in 1790. And the next year, we already have 10 amendments, right, to our Constitution. So it happens fast, and it's kind of like, okay, fine, right. And so then we have those 10 amendments, right? So that should do it for our Constitution. That kind of wraps it up. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email me, and I will try to respond as soon as possible. Have a great day.